hope everyone has had a little bit of food and drink in them to sustain them for the next, it's about 6.5 hours, the presentation, so okay. No, I didn't need these 20 years ago when I met some of you, I'm sure. Listen, it's always exciting and actually kind of scary when Art Horn shares with his team that he's about to embark on writing a new book. It's exciting, obviously, because we have, at least it's my boss and my personal mentor and a great friend who has a lot to share with the universe. And when he puts the pen to paper and when he puts his fingers on his keyboard, it's always amazing for me what's stored up there and what he can get out on paper. So we're really, really excited about this one. Now, over the past few years, he's written a few books. Some of you may have read them. Gifts of Leadership, Face It, Beyond Ego. They're all really around effective leadership. Kind of a nice, safe topic, yes? Well, when he told us this year he was writing a book on accountability, responsibility, and commitment, we all thought quietly under our breath, oh geez. In fact, I wondered, Art, what chapter will I show up in? Hopefully it's not the one that he refers to when he talks about bad faith. Or perhaps feeling like a victim. Self-absorption. The promise breakers. Or even worse, silos, departmental accusations, and unending wars. My goodness, Art. I quote near the beginning of the book, I can't deny I sometimes think it would be nice if the people who were accountable to me would always answer my queries and complaints by simply taking full responsibility. See what I'm talking about? All right. In fact, this is a really exciting topic, and for years people have been asking our organization around the umbrella of accountability. Horn, can you help our team drive accountability as an entire organization? Can you help my actual department become more responsible? I have an individual who's struggling on the team, and even within our executive coaching realm, people will come to Art and our team to say, can you help me become more responsible and accountable as a leader? So the really exciting thing about this book is that it's been designed to answer those questions. And in fact, it's a beautiful blend of Art's intellect, yet it's very practical. There are a ton of checklists and assessments, and it's quite attainable, which is really terrific. So I would like to finish off before my next introduction. There is a quote that to me represents Art. He says here, the harder you squeeze people for accountability, the less genuinely responsible they become. Tickle responsibility out of them by encouraging self-discovery and coming clean with themselves. So that's the Art I've come to know over the past 20 years, and many of you know, Joan, many of you are smiling right now. That's the Art that we all know. And I'm really excited. I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who will, again, formally introduce our author and man of the hour, Art Horn. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Paul Bogner. He is the Chief Operating Officer of Service Inspired Restaurants, the organization behind many popular brands that many of you, I'm sure, have dined with, including Jack Astor's, Scatterbush, and Red's, just to name a few. Paul engaged Horn for a significant multi-year leadership development initiative that I believe has served your leadership team quite well. Yes, Paul? Just nod. Prior to his time at CIRCOR, Paul was president of Simmons Canada. So everyone, I'd like to introduce Mr. Paul Bogner. Thank you.
I'm honored, Art, thank you. It's crazy when you don't have to write a speech because you kind of speak from your heart and your experience. I'm a little bit nervous because I think this damn book was written about myself and the guy who owns Service Inspired Restaurants, because we've been a test case for Art for about the last 6 years. So I met Art, honestly, I was scrutinized by Art on behalf of the company because they were going to stretch outside the restaurant space and hire somebody that came from a real business. Yeah, and for anybody that has been engaged in hospitality, If you did something before you started in that career, you can't even imagine what goes on with 5,600 employees, most under the age of 25, who are empowered now by Kathleen Wynne to do whatever the hell they want, whenever they want. So we talk about accountability in an organization with two guys that run the company. Myself, and I'm a capitalist, believe me, I don't do anything other than this. I'm not going to send you a bill for this, but I believe in capitalism. I believe in working hard. I believe in great experiences for individuals. And if you made a couple of dollars in between, that's a good thing for all of us. And the guy I work for is a philanthropist entrepreneur. So he has, I don't know, maybe 1,000 ideas a day. And he believes that 800 out of 1,000 are really freaking good. And 200 are bad. We believe 2 are good and the balance are bad. And so there's this, what we called marriage counseling that Peter and I went to with Art for the better part of the first 3 years. In our world, it was, we want accountability, we want process. And on the other side, how do you teach process and accountability to a pile of people that could care less? So we went through a lot of discovery. And I will tell you today, after the last probably 4 years, we've got an organization that's gone from, we hope to sell you a burger and fries and leave me a good tip if I unbutton, to an organization that really talks about accountability, talks about holding people to task. The bigger part, I killed it beginning of this year. We don't do annual reviews anymore. I never did believe in them, right? What happens in an annual review, you walk into your boss's office and tell your boss how great you are. By default, he or she says, well, I got to counter them coming in here, so I got to find 3 things that they're really bad at, and we're going to negotiate to get to a 3 because my bell curve. The difference now is we talk about accountability, true accountability. We talk about coachable moments. We do this ongoing with every one of our employees, and we've discovered that we've moved the needle so fast in the last 2 years. Proud to say we're now one of the fastest growing restaurant companies in our space. We're becoming one of the most profitable, but inherently profitable, not because we raised prices, but because we're doing a better job. We get some of the highest service scores, and face it, you're all potentially my guests. Best thing I can do is give you a great service experience, give you consistent quality, and it's because everybody, all 5,600 people are saying, I believe in this notion of accountability and coachable moments. So Art, from me, thank you very much. Read this book. This book's unbelievable. As a matter of fact, I didn't even think the first part of the book, when Art said, can you do a pre-read? I'm going to give you the manuscript, read this. I got through chapter 1, I said, this is the biggest crock of shit I've ever read. It can't be true. And he says, as a matter of fact, it absolutely is true. And it has nothing to do with business or anything. It's about a personal experience that Art had, hence the title, Throw Your Stuff Off the Plane. And if you haven't read the book, when you do read the book, you're going to say, oh my God, this guy has actually done a whole bunch of stuff in his life that formed the basis for what he's written this book about. So if you're clients, if you're potential clients, and you really want to drive, it's an easy word to say accountability, but truly get people to embrace what you do. These guys are starting to figure that out in a way that nobody else has. So it's my pleasure to introduce Art Horn, and hopefully you're going to share a little bit with them that you've managed to share with me for the last 5 or 6 years.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, thanks everybody. We're just going to adjust the sound volume soon, just like that. I can hear it changing. Now, I'll be speaking truly for about 22 minutes. So if you're going to need to move around, this would be the time. And I see that there's a preponderance of people at the bar, which is, and you're resisting the urge to leave it. So just stay where you are. I want to start by saying thank you again to all of you for being here tonight. It was a daunting looking morning when we saw the snow on its way, and most of us just simply found the courage to live by our intention and be here. So thank you very much. I'm grateful. Would you do me a favor and raise your hand if you know Lynn Gallagher? Okay, so that sort of proves the point I want to make. Lynn's an extraordinarily hardworking, strong leader who moves people, and I attribute today's success, the fact that you're here, the huge organization it required to get here, to Lynn and her leadership vision and her inspirational capacity. So a round of applause to Lynn, please. And you know, the whole Horn team is behind the scenes on this, so I know you know I feel grateful, but I'm telling you out loud, I really do thank you. Okay, so I'd like to just maybe chat with you a bit about first for the title of the book. Throw Your Stuff Off the Plane is actually, it's got a dual purpose. It's a true story, and it's also got a hidden meaning to it about baggage. And thank goodness the title "Throw Your Stuff Off the Plane." Well, you can just throw yourself off the plane. Actually, it's neat. The airports across the United States have taken on the book, which is a good sign. So I guess that's because the word "plane" is in there, right? And everyone's wondering what's involved. It was about 40 years ago when I was almost in a plane crash. And I was heading up north to Marathon, Ontario. Anybody know of Marathon? It's near, well, it's not really near, but Thunder Bay is the biggest airport. And I was going to a logging camp to spend the summer pulling logs off Lake Superior with a long pole called a picaroon. And I got to the Thunder Bay airport and just said to a guy standing next to me, "Do you know how to get to Marathon?" And he said, "Sure, I'm flying to Marathon. They've got a small little landing strip there. I can drop you off." I thought that'd be great. And I had with me a duffel bag with, the summer's clothing, socks and underwear, I guess, and 2 boxes of books. And at the time, I was a pretty serious student of philosophy and Eastern philosophy and meditation. And those 2 boxes of books, they were actually milk cartons, red silverwood milk cartons, I'll never forget. They contained my heart. So anyway, I put the 2 boxes of books inside this little Cessna aircraft, the side door, crawled into the co-pilot seat, and buckled up, and the pilot, as we began to take off, literally looked back. Actually, yeah, for him it was looked back there and saw the 2 silverwood boxes of books and said, "We should be okay." I thought, well, there's accountability for you. I thought pilots had this chest-thumping accountability thing about them, but no, we should be okay. So we take off, and we're up in the air, and everything was fine. I looked out the window, and I could see the forest underneath up in northern Ontario. And then he begins tapping at one of his gauges and says, oh boy, we're too heavy. Throw your stuff off the plane." And I'm going, "What are you talking about? Throw your stuff off the plane." So I was, seat belted in, and there wasn't any place in little Cessna to get up and walk around. So I had to take off my seatbelt and sort of squeeze around between the 2 seats. And I saw the little side door. I opened up the hatch, and the 2 boxes of books were there, trembling with the shake of the airplane. And I pushed one out, pushed the other one out, and then the pilot goes, "Ah, thank goodness." And the plane stabilized, and I'm looking out, and I could see my books still falling into the forest. They're probably still there. You could go up and pick up a book. So I felt terrible, and obviously. But the story is fitting. But there's another reason, of course, and that's because part of the story or the book is about how each of us benefits when we discover certain patterns in our thinking that we know hold us back from what we know we probably ought to be doing. And if we can locate those patterns and kind of crack them open and explore them and maybe discuss them with ourselves or with someone, We can toss out our baggage and actually reprogram in a good, positive way. So that's what this book is about. It's throw your stuff off the plane. Now there's two subheadings, as you can see, or there is a secondary heading, and it basically is saying this book's about accountability, but there's two target readers. One is the individual reader, the person. It's a virtual self-help book in that sense, if you want it. If you want to find yourself a bit stronger at being able to manage your own moods or your reactions, this book's targeted right for you. Secondly, this book is targeted for leaders who want to create a culture of accountability. And there's specific advice, which we'll chat about, that goes to what a leader can do to engender a culture where people take more self-responsibility. Okay, so why the book? So there's several reasons I'd like to share. First, I have to confess that contrary to what Sean said earlier, it wasn't a year ago. Actually, it was 8 years ago when I announced to my team, I'm writing a book about accountability. And after 2 years, I stopped writing. So people began to make fun of me. Oh, accountability? Hello? So the truth is I obviously stopped and then restarted and worked my way through whatever was holding me back. I threw my own stuff off the plane. Another reason I wrote the book is I have a clear memory of a life-changing moment. Do you ever have that personal experience of watching, for example, your parents cry for the first time? Usually there's a period in someone's life, or somewhere around the ages of puberty actually, where kids realize, holy mackerel, my parents don't know what they're doing either. And they see a parent cry, for example, and they realize mommy or daddy says, I don't know what to do. So I had a kind of an experience like that when I was a kid, but also one when I was a consultant serving clients. And I remember I'd like to share with you, for the first 3 years of my business, all of our clients, actually all of my clients, it was a one-man show for the first while, were companies ranging in size and gross sales from maybe $400,000 a year to $1.2 million a year. And it was a pretty good business. It kept me going for a while. But then out of the blue, through good fortune, I suppose, I scored, by the time this happened, there was another person on the team, a great big consulting contract with a brand name company that, in fact, it's one of the world's top brands. I'm not going to tell you the name of the company because it's not a very nice story. But the fact is, it was a huge thing. At that time, it was a $60,000 contract, which was a big deal for a two-person show 34 years ago. And I remember being really proud of getting it. And the project itself involved exploring the learning needs of the marketing community. So I was asked to go see the executive vice president of marketing for this monster company, sales and marketing, actually. He owned the whole shebang. Remember, I'm telling you this story because something's about to happen that made me want to write this book. So I go to his office to meet with him, and I was really impressed. His office was, literally the size of 2/3 of this room. In one corner, he had a large living room area with a couch and comfy chairs. Another corner, he had this great big boardroom table seating 14 people. And over here, he had this huge mahogany desk, really fancy, really neat. I was really impressed. And so I sat down at his boardroom table. He sat at the head. He was tall. Anyone's taller than I am. But he was tall and powerful, and I was really impressed. So he is talking to me about the reason he endorsed this project. And he said to me in the middle of the conversation, "Oh, you've got our org chart, right?" And I said, "No, actually, I don't have that yet." He said, "I'll get you one." Fine. But I noticed he wasn't writing, he didn't even have a pencil and paper. He wasn't writing anything down. So I was thinking on the spot, well, guys who are executive vice presidents of this kind of organization, they probably don't need to write stuff down. They probably just remember these things, and that's how they got to where they are. So I remember going home that night, and I swear, at this moment, I can remember laying in bed that night thinking, I wonder how they're going to get that org chart to me. Perhaps a chauffeur will come with his hat, and it'll be in a sealed envelope. Yeah, that's a ticket. Or maybe when I go in next time, his assistant, or in those days it was his secretary, will hand the document to me, in, on a silver platter, perhaps. But no, I never got the book. But so that was for me watching my mom or your daddy cry. It's like, holy mackerel, ignore the man behind the curtain. Or that's Wizard of Oz. You all remember that, right? Yeah. I'm sorry, a lot of folks don't have their head together when it comes to living by their word or making their commitments come true. So that bugged me then, or at least fascinated me, and it fascinates me even today. Another reason I wrote the book is very similar to that. I've been, coaching executives, in fact, for about 30 years. And if you add up the number of folks I've sat with and tried to help, it's a pretty big number. And I've got a fair bit of experience at it. And one thing I've noticed for sure is the largest issue that executives raise to me, or the most frequently raised topic, is, we don't have accountability in our organization. People say what they're going to do and they don't do it. We create objectives we don't fulfill. We actually put them in a drawer and then we go back, whoops, they're still in the drawer. We have an accountability problem around our place. In fact, when people don't come through with what they promise, no one holds them to account. No one says, hey, what went wrong there? And that's a really common problem. Would you raise your hand if you agree that that's a thing? It's a thing. Thank you for that support. So the book is partly about how you can tackle, or we can tackle, that thing. And it's a common thing. The two other reasons I won't bore you with for too long for why I wrote the book. One is I've had a lifelong fascination with willpower. I've always wondered, where does will come from? Like when that guy said to me, I'll get you that org chart, what's that about really? Did he intend it? Was he committed? Was he convinced? Was he willful? Could he hold on to that? Would he remember? Where does willpower come from? If you want to quit smoking or lose weight or exercise, where does that come from? So I've been fascinated by that. I remember, frankly, being a cigarette smoker. I used to love smoking cigarettes. I'd put out, you could just see it, right? I'd put out a cigarette and say, that's it. You know what? This is a stupid habit. I quit. That's it. I quit. And then what 4 hours later, some trigger would arise, and I would remember my intention was to quit. I don't know what happened to it, but it's gone now. So I researched willpower literally. You don't want to hear too many years go by in this conversation today, but 40 years ago, and found out, okay, well, it's been a discussion for 2,500 years. Plato raised the topic of overcoming appetites. But even after that, in Queen Victoria's era, willpower was about, the fight with your impulses. And for you to have strong willpower meant you had to fight. You had to bring power to bear. And now in 2018, it's become clear to the positive psychology movement that actually no, willpower is about grace. It's about finesse and elegance. Do you have enough emotional savvy to navigate your way around and through your impulses? So the book is partly about that fascinating topic of where that navigation skill comes from. The book is also about blame. I've been fascinated by the topic of attribution theory, or where people attribute blame or just blame for a long time as well. And you can count the number of times, I encourage you to do this, where people tomorrow, where they actually, you hear them attributing responsibility for something, or defending themselves, or blaming somebody for something. On my car ride here, I'll say this briefly. A good colleague friend of mine wrote this morning, he couldn't make it today. Which is fine, truly. But his email was just laced with a carefully worded navigation around, why, and maybe why that's okay, and why I can't blame him, because it wasn't really his fault. It was the meeting that had been called, and gosh darn the snow problem, and Well, I'm sure it's fine, and you're okay. And I wrote, yeah, you got it, no problem, buddy. But it's just laced with the same stuff. So that happens everywhere we turn. And that's an interesting phenomenon. Why do people move into defense or attribute cause elsewhere? I think that's pretty interesting. So, and thus, the book talks about that stuff ad nauseum. Sorry. Okay, so we need to just agree today for only a couple of minutes on just what accountability is as far as the book is concerned. And as you can see from the screen, and I'm sure you're reminded of it, basically most of us think of accountability as an obligation to explain ourselves. So it's an obligation to account for our actions. And it's for many people scary. For some people, accountability is actually an opportunity to prove yourself, to demonstrate your successes, your performance, how hard you work, or accountability is a positive thing generally because it involves something deeper when it's pure and genuine. We'll talk a bit about that. Enough about that. So before we just turn this slide, I want to make what for me is really important. The real theme of pure accountability in a culture is honesty. When there is accountability, sure, people are expected to explain themselves, or sure, managers or leaders are expected to ask others, or colleagues are expected to ask others for explanations. But underneath that is an understood, hopefully non-threatening culture of, let's be honest with ourselves. I'm asking you because I care about our mission. I'm actually not going to move into blame. And I'm answering your questions because I'm also interested in our mission. I'm not interested in defense. When you can clear away the judgments people have and actually get focused on the mission, the task at hand, you create a culture where people feel they can take the risk of being honest. That's a beautiful thing. And the book sort of unpacks how that works. Okay. What's the effect of accountability on our organization? Paul alluded to it a short while ago. Basically what you get is greater productivity, high performance teams. You get organizations where people actually want to stay because they're learning. Accountability involves, when it's pure and good, it involves improved employee retention. It involves creating a learning culture, as Paul said earlier, where there are teachable moments. And that's a well-used, almost cliche phrase, but it's a thing where people aren't threatened by the notion of accountability. They're actually open to the possibility of learning. They become more effective and happier campers because they work for a leader who's not going to squeeze them to death. So the big question is, how does an organization create a culture of accountability? And if you, and I have literally been in rooms where I've listened to people say, we have a problem with accountability. And I've heard HR groups, for example, create the usual list of things we need to do to address this problem. We need to, and they're all up there, we need to make sure everyone's objectives are clear. We need to know what the vision is, the values are, what the strategy is. We need to align job descriptions with what we're expecting people to do. We need to properly compensate them. We need to measure their performance in all possible ways so we can link compensation to the job description and to the objectives and thereby get alignment in these things. And hooah, then we got accountability on a roll. Yes, and then we provide ongoing feedback so people learn where they may be slipping up and so that they can be held accountable, and then they can fine-tune things, not just the individual skills, but also fine-tune the company's approach to its marketplace. And the last item up there is, indeed, we need to make sure people are aware of the consequences, not just of failed performance, but consequences of not hitting objectives. And when we educate people in all these ways and we execute these things, you do wind up, and it's good. I'm not, some of you are smiling because you think I'm setting up the big kill. But no, they're all powerful things you got to do. You can't actually have a culture of accountability if you don't have systems. It's necessary. But from what I have seen many dozens of times, all the systems never quite add up to a pure, successful, enriched environment where pure accountability or true accountability is experienced or observed. There's a missing ingredient, and the book specifically is about that missing ingredient. You can have all the systems you want in the world, but what you've got to have is people flourishing. And that is, they need to find accountability from within themselves. It's not about imposing accountability, it's about helping people discover self-responsibility. And that's the challenge. The kind of individual we're talking about in an organization of genuine accountability is someone who is merely in growth mode, flourishing. They haven't found enlightenment. None of us ever will. So I'm sorry to be aggressive about that. What they have found is they're unfolding. And the book's not trying to describe how somebody ought to unfold or what full unfoldment looks like. It's merely saying if you want to unfold, if you want to help your team grow or blossom and unfold, there are certain things you can do, and you'll find that things get better, and you will feel like there's a culture of accountability. But the idea is helping people find it from within themselves as opposed to you or us imposing it on them. There's also something about the individual who is flourishing, who has the inclination, you know what, I actually want to do what I say I'm going to do. It's part of who I am. I want to live by my word. In fact, I don't want to blame others. I'm not interested in blame. I'm interested maybe in finding original causes to problems, but not with an eye towards judging people, but with an eye towards moving things along. Let's make it work. They also are people, when they're unfolding, they tend to move into action as opposed to looking backwards and saying, who's to blame for what? So action orientation is a part of the flourishing self that is the bedrock of accountability. Is bedrock and flourishing, are they contradictory? Forgive me. But you have a cooperative attitude with me, so you're willing to let me make my mistakes. See that? All right. Even I want to turn the slide, so we'll just do it. All right, so then the big question is, so what can the leader do to create this culture, and what can we do ourselves to create the culture? So here's some, by the way, Sean said there's a lot of tricks and tips in the book. It's funny, you know, I have written a few other books, and the most consistent feedback I've had as an author is, oh, the books you write are too ideological, too abstract, impractical. So then this time, in this particular book, I wrote as many long lists of tips as I could possibly muster. And now the feedback I've gotten, well, it's really loaded up with tips. So, sorry, I don't know I'll look for the middle way, I own it. Okay, so here's 5, but the book probably has 50. But these are, in my opinion, the 5 juiciest things a leader can do to create this culture we're referring to. The first one is learning the distinction between discerning and judging. I won't try to unpack that completely right now, but I just want you to hear me say there's a difference. The wise leader, in my opinion, spots what's going on, but resists the temptation to blame or to go into human judgment mode, and just stays with their discernment and acts on that, and resists that temptation. It's a nuance, but when you sort of get it, just basically take the people judgment out and stay focused on the facts, and you're really cooking. Another thing a leader can do, of course, and you've heard me harp on this, is don't participate in blame. You might ask, so where did we go wrong on this? What's the cause of this? Those are fine, juicy questions. You just don't want to send a signal of, because heads are going to roll, or who's responsible for this problem. That's, again, a fine distinction between discerning and judging, actually. Biggest thing a leader can do to create this kind of culture, and I've seen this work and I've seen it not work. I've seen it, when it doesn't work, it's because this is missing. It's a necessary condition, not a sufficient condition, is market it. Promote the idea of we are building for ourselves a learning culture. And when you put a label to it and you talk about it as a thing, I call that thingizing it. When you make a thing out of it, it winds up living. And it becomes a characteristic of your culture that can be measured, labeled. It's really neat. Promote it as a thing. And we've already made reference to the learning culture as a way of life. The last thing on this list of what a leader can do for tonight is adopt a certain communication style. Sometimes leaders adopt, of course, a hardball style. maybe that's when maybe they imply there needs to be some fear going on. Or hardball involves sometimes a raised voice or increased intensity on the inquiries. Softball is the opposite. When a leader adopts a softball modus, then that leader tends not to pursue what went wrong and just sort of avoid the confrontation altogether and skate around it because life goes on and we're busy and it's a bit of a drag. Who wants to have that confrontation? And the style espoused in the book is to adopt a real ball. You know, like I'm going to deal with reality. I'm going to love you anyway, but we're going to solve the problem. We're on a mission to solve the problem, or we're on a mission to achieve our goals. We will achieve the goals. Watch us, and the little thing that went wrong there, we need to fix it so we can get back on track. And you can expect I'm going to ask you, and that's okay because you know I'm not going to attack you. Real ball is when you hear it, it can be a beautiful way of communicating. Enough for what leaders can do. I promise you soon we'll stop. Okay, so now what can we each as individuals do to create this unfolding, flourishing self as a part of a culture of accountability? And there are 3 things listed. I'd like to unpack the 3 of them, and then we're cooking. First, I'll tell you a story about the first item, things I don't want to do. What can I do to improve my own ability to override impulses? Well, actually, the bad news is practice doing little things you don't like to do. So I'll tell you a story. Our business has been around for July 10th, 1984. You do the math, because I never can. 30 some odd years. And for the first 15 of those years, I was the primary facilitator. And I would stand in front of groups, because I believed it in my heart, and basically say, you know what, you can choose to be happy. You can choose a positive attitude. You can just lift yourself up. Yeah, lift yourself up. And then after the event, I would get in my car, drive away, and I really didn't buy it in my heart. I was experiencing a kind of a cognitive dissonance where I knew in my own heart I couldn't improve my ability to manage impulses, but I would tell people you can. So one day I had lunch with a friend of mine who's a medical doctor down at Mount Sinai Hospital. At the time, my office was in my Shepherd Center apartment, and he said to me, I explained, Arnie, I have a cognitive dissonance issue. I'm saying you can pick yourself up, but I can't do it myself. What do I do? And he gave me a prescription. But it wasn't a molecule. It was a piece of advice. Basically, the advice was, you know what? When you get to Shepherd Center, you're confronted with the ultimate existential decision at the subway station. The stairs or the escalator. Now, he knew I was an escalator kind of guy. So he said, what are you going to choose? I said, the escalator. He said, don't, take the stairs. Why? I asked. Because you don't want to. And when you practice doing little things you don't want to do, you wind up getting to the metaphorical top of the stairs and looking back and you say, I did that. Hey, I did that. And it's just a little flash of an insight. And then if you, 6 hours later or the next day, and you do this 3 times a day, by the way, you do that again. You want apple pie and you wait 15 minutes instead, or you want to get home fast and you take the long way home, you wind up strengthening the muscle of willpower. I never knew that's how it worked, and it's been shown repeatedly that willpower links directly to self-esteem, and self-esteem links directly to the ability to overcome impulses. And if you want to help a child or any grown-up find increased willpower or capacity to come through on their word, help them elevate their self-esteem, which is the same as saying help them flourish or unfold. Which takes me to the next point, which is about shining the light with them or for yourself here on troublesome patterns. For example, actually, I'll tell you my own little thing quickly. Back when I was a cigarette smoker, I realized I can't quit. I don't know what this is about. And I finally said, now why do I have this impulse to smoke? What is it about? And I unpacked that in the context of that's how I deal with my oral cravings. That's linked to my own insecurities, and it makes me feel whole, even though it's sort of dumb for me. And I just looked at it, and I talked to people about it. That is, I shared with them my quest and my understanding of why I do that. And then gradually, just by unpacking it, describing it, cracking it open, I discovered I don't need to smoke. And I gradually just stopped smoking. You know, my favorite Leonard Cohen song is the song Anthem. Have you ever heard of? There's a line in it. It says, "There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." Which is, if you really think about that for a while, it's pretty sweet. And the claim in the book is, and I believe this in my gut, each of us has a little crack in our own way of operating, and we know in our heart or in ourselves, you know what, it's probably my biggest soft spot, it's my weakness. This thing, whatever yours is, I have one too, trust me. I actually have 8. But they're gone now, right? When you discover the pattern and you take it apart and you look inside the crack and shine the light inside and talk about it and think about it and write about it maybe, it winds up dissipating. Now, a new crack happens to arise, but that's a different topic. You know, when I was, well, that's enough. I'll tell you one more story, and it's about the third item on this screen, about what we can do as individuals to increase our ability to flourish or find greater self-esteem. The story I'd like to tell you is probably the answer to the question I hear more often than anything else. The question I get at cocktail parties and almost everybody I've ever interviewed. If I give them say, any questions you want to ask me? There's a predictable one, like at least 8 out of 10 times the question will be, how'd you get started in this business? How did you get started in this business? And so I never tell the whole story, but I'll tell you, I said never in front of them, but here it comes. It was a 20-minute experience. I started my business after 6 months of being unemployed, and I wanted to be a consultant, didn't do anything about it. And one day I was reading a book, it happened to be by Thoreau, but I've read it elsewhere. Basically, the author saying, you know what, if you want something, visualize it, and then fulfill the vision. Live as though you've already fulfilled the vision. So I closed the book and said, that's a ticket. I'm going to create a vision in my mind's eye for me being a consultant. And I was sitting in the Shepherd Center, sitting in the Shepherd Center. I'm glad that went by. And I closed the book and I said, okay, so what's my vision of being a consultant? And this is my vision. By the way, it's etched in my head. I still have it clear as day. This is my vision. It's me in the Shepherd Center, walking quickly towards a ringing telephone with 2 file folders under my arm. 2 file folders because I got multiple clients and I'm a busy camper running for the phone because gosh darn, I'm a busy guy. And that's it. And I even populated the vision with other details like what am I wearing and what kinds of things do people call me about. And the more details, the better. That was my vision. And I held that vision in my mind's eye for about 20 minutes. And after during the 20 minutes, of course, my mind wandered off, as it is wont to do. But every time it wandered away, I brought it back and got back to the vision, it's still there. And then I opened my eyes and I said, okay, that's it. I am now a consultant. I didn't tell you that at the time I was sitting in my living room wearing a bathrobe, otherwise naked, smoking a cigarette, looking down at my table next to where my ashtray is. There's a phone there and phone's not ringing. So I'm now a consultant, but there ain't nothing happening here. So I realized at that moment, of course, there's another side to this. You got to actually do the work. So I know I'm probably sounding like I'm exaggerating, but it's clear as day to me. I put the cigarette out. I got up. I went into that spare bedroom where the desk was. I got out a hard copy of the old Yellow Pages directory, and I turned to the target market, found a company I wanted to call, and I didn't get the first I didn't get an appointment immediately, but within half an hour, I got my first appointment to go see a potential client, which I never got, but it worked, right? I called these people, got appointments over time, and started the business. And the point of the story is, hey, that vision with that goal helped a lot. It gave me a sense of, yeah, I want that I can see it. And by the way, I don't know if you are familiar with cybernetic loops in the brain, but that's why it works. When you have a vision or a goal and you visualized it, your brain just sort of observes, oh, that's what I'm looking for over there. And you turn direction, you move that way. And you can actually begin to unconsciously see, because of the goal embedded in your head, where you want to get to. Look, how do you respond to individual stories or situations? So this thing about what can you do, what can any of us do to become more of an unfolding, flourishing, self-responsible person, we can at least get a grip on where do we want to get to and what's it look like, and that helps to inform self-esteem. Okay. I'm going to stop now, I swear. People are leaving the room. So here's what we're going to do. I'd like to ask Sean to step back up and facilitate any discussion of any questions or comments you want to make. And then if there are no questions or comments, as we continue to mingle amongst our new friends, there's a list of 8 items on the screen. And one of those 8 items is not in the book. And the other 7 items are in the book. And the job in this little task, if you're looking for a topic of conversation while you mingle around the room, figure out which one's not in the book. And actually, I have said enough today that I believe you could deduce which of those is not in the book. And then after a little while goes by, we'll step back up and take this up, as my grade 8 teacher used to say, unless we don't want to, in which case we won't. Sean, you...
And if you don't get the right answer, you don't get a book, right?
Oh, that's a good one. Accountability built right in.
Just quickly, we won't keep you much longer, but we typically at our launches have one big event, and we actually did an experiment where we had an executive breakfast last week, and this more typical sort of cocktail event. And because people have told us they want to get up close and personal with art. So this is your opportunity. Usually there's a lot more people in the room. So please ask away. Just shout it out, or I can come by with a mic, but it usually makes people nervous. What questions do you have of this guy? Or you can challenge him too. He's good at that. So questions, comments, thoughts?
I have a question.
Yeah, go. All right. Rhonda.
There's been a lot of work on willpower, and it's something that you can exhaust. So as you're trying to have willpower to do X, you run out of willpower to do Y. What's your thoughts on that?
The word for it is willpower depletion. And certain things can deplete our willpower. And the biggest thing that depletes it is excess use of willpower, oddly enough. So if you find yourself resisting something all day long, then someone dangles a carrot in front of you, you just say, okay, I'll do it. So willpower depletion is a measurable phenomenon. And by the way, the way scientists measure willpower is to count the number of seconds you can keep your hand in a really cold, ice-cold pot of water. And people with higher willpower can keep it there longer. And those of us who give in faster just go, oh, it's stupid. Why would I want to do that? So they correlate the duration of your hand in the water with your self-esteem and your willpower. And they have found that certain things deplete it, and one of them is excessive use of the willpower. The book actually has a chapter that lists 20 things you can do to increase willpower. The most surprising, I think it might even be on there. See, we're already giving you the secret answers. Oh, no, it's not there. Oh, it is number 1, glucose. You can actually increase your level of glucose and your willpower will rise. Who would have guessed that? But they're not talking about candy or cake. It's different kinds of sugar. So it's a big topic, and willpower does deplete, and there are things you can do. The book tries to depict most of them, and I'm sorry I can't go further.
Thanks, Rhonda. Any others? Yes, go.
You talk a lot about not assigning blame or being non-judgmental. You also often when you get to that point, you are assigning judgment to action and so forth. How do you reconcile kind of the softer side of accountability, which you talked about, versus
Yeah.
the system side that organizations play?
Yeah, that's great. So I'm going to paraphrase the question to make sure I got it right. I think you're asking, how is it possible to judge, which leaders must do for a living, and be non-judgmental at the same time? Is that right?
Yeah, and in the system of performance management.
Particularly in a performance.
Getting to the point of saying, here's the 3 things you did wrong, and that's why this happened.
Yeah, yeah. So this notion of differentiating discernment from judgment is key. You know, it was in 1952 and then reprinted in Harvard Business Review in 1984, where Carl Rogers, the founder of humanism, like he's the guy who invented client-centered therapy. He wrote an article to business people called "Gateways and Barriers to Communication." And his message to business people was, "You guys don't communicate worth a darn." And he prescribed a game business people learn where they hear what someone's saying and they have to paraphrase it and get it right without any importing of personal judgment. And it's a skill, and it's very difficult for leaders to learn. It really is about the leader learning not to make certain kinds of judgments, but to still be discerning. The judgments are, don't use universalizations. For example, if you're the kind of leader who says, "Oh, Bob always screws that up," or "There's no way we're going to get that done." See those universalizations? Those are examples of judgments. Other things that are prohibited, if you're going to try to master this, are about attending to the notion that there's nothing wrong with the employee. For example, if performance management says you have to make 10 outbound prospecting calls per day, and I consistently find they're only making 2, then I've got to resist the temptation to say, "You're screwing up." Or what I should do instead is say, remember the honesty thing, the real ball thing? This isn't what we agreed to. Let's figure that out. Why aren't you? Not here's how you make the calls, I'll retrain you. It's why aren't you? Are we participating in a game? I don't mean that to sound sarcastic. We need to explore whether there's, what dynamics going on here so that we can get to the bottom of it, but without crossing that line and becoming judgmental of the person, like, "I don't like this guy," or "He's not a keeper anymore," or "This guy's lazy." You know what the fundamental theory is? He's lazy, or he's afraid. I need to find that stuff out and work it through. And the book talks about how to do that, actually. Anybody else? Sorry, Sean.
Others?
Just one question. Favorite chapter in the book and why?
Okay. It's the chapter on willpower, and I'd like to tell you why, because you asked. But I'd probably tell you why anyway. What I learned in exploring that topic, and this is really neat, the location of a person's will, the topic of their will in the brain is different from the location of their appetites. So I've got this vision of how I want things to be, and it's physically removed, not part of the same gig. It's in the circuit, but it's a different location in the brain. I've got these other appetites that want what they want. So for example, if I want to stop talking right now because I'm afraid of you not loving me, there's one, then the vision of doing what's right versus my appetites are in a different place of the brain, which when you really think about it, entertains the possibility of a subject-object difference between I, the willing agent, and me and my habits and appetites and impulses. I am not my impulses, I have impulses. I am not my impulses, I have impulses. So the physical separation of these things allows for a cognitive separation of the same thing, and you can experience what they call disidentification, so that you are no longer your impulses, you are the owner of the impulses, and then you get to be the chooser of whether you oblige the impulses. It's a beautiful thing. Anyway, I think so. I didn't make that up, by the way. There's even more credible people made that up. I'll stop there. Anybody else?
Anything else? I have a question, just your point number 3 there.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about how accountability, responsibility, and let's say ownership, how those work? Do they have a different meaning to you?
Yeah.
And then, when you talk about accountability, obviously there's different levels of it.
Mhm.
Given project, task, initiative, how do you see that in terms of where the person at the top of the corner office obviously has a different level of accountability as somebody that can be assigned to a particular project?
Yeah, so I think there's 2 questions packed in there. So much for my paraphrasing skills. I hear 2 questions in there, but I don't know what they are. I can say this. First of all, number 3 is the item that is not in the book. So thanks a lot. Hillary Clinton actually did say that. I'm accountable for what happened in Benghazi, but I'm not responsible. And what she meant was, I own it because it's my area of my area of accountability. But I didn't make the mistakes that were made. So I'll own the ownership thing here, but I didn't do it. Now, when I first heard that, I thought, oh, that's an interesting distinction. What's it mean? I think we share that curiosity. And I'm pretty sure there's a valid argument in there. In the normal hierarchical structure, somebody is at the top and they own everything. Period. Then the larger question becomes, how do we divvy up responsibility? And I can't go further than that. It would, unless you want to repose the question, it's up to you. I'm not taking responsibility for this situation. I own it though. Oh. Further questions? You want a supplementary? No? All right.
Any others? All right, good.
By the way, number 3 is not in the book, and the rest of them are. And so much for the cocktail mingling discussion. Which is good. So there's the answer, everybody. I'm done. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Great, okay, thank you, Art. So, again, we are grateful you made time to listen to Art, and hopefully he has inspired a couple of thoughts, and hopefully you'll all be a little more accountable or self-responsible, figure out what they mean, your own definitions, and read the book. You'll enjoy it. So again, on behalf of the Horn team, thank you for your presence. I think you're going to love the book. Make sure on your way out, I'm not trying to escort you out, on your way out there are signed copies, and again, give yourselves a round of applause for holding yourself accountable for some personal development. So thank you.